I couldn't believe my eyes. Godfrey just stood there looking shocked and confused. What's going on? Did you mess with our water? Kuradel. He stuttered. Godfrey used the antidote crystals, I yelled, trying to snap him out of it. But Godfrey was super slow, rummaging through his backpack like he was in a trance. Just then, Kuradel let out a loud hi-ya and jumped off the rock. He kicked Godfrey's hand away, sending a green crystal flying across the dirt. Kuradel grabbed the crystal and started digging through Godfrey's pack, pulling out more crystals and stuffing them into his own pouch. We were in big trouble now. What's going on, Kuradel? Is this some kind of test? I asked, trying to stay calm. But Kuradel just laughed at us. You guys are so clueless, he sneered, before kicking Godfrey right in the mouth. Godfrey grunted in pain, and his health bar took a hit. Kuradel's cursor turned orange, which meant he was now marked as a bad guy in the game. Godfrey was still really slow to catch on, but I knew we had to act fast if we wanted to get out of this mess. We were stuck. This part of the wilderness was empty. No one was going to magically appear and save us. Godfrey's eyes widened as Kuradel started yelling at him. You're even dumber than I thought. Godfrey. Kuradel's voice bounced off the rocks. I've got a lot to say to you, but let's not waste time on small talk. Kuradel pulled out his huge sword and swung it back, getting ready to strike. The blade shone in the sunlight, looking super sharp. Godfrey took a step back, looking nervous. Wait, Kuradel. What's going on? Isn't this part of the test? But Kuradel just sneered at him. Shut up and let's get this over with. With that he swung his sword down, ready to attack. I heard a loud thud, and suddenly a big chunk of Godfrey's health was gone. He finally realized he was in big trouble, and started screaming, but it was too late. Kuradel's sword flashed twice, then 3 times, each time taking another chunk out of Godfrey's health bar. When it turned red, Kuradel finally stopped swinging his sword. For a second I thought he might spare Godfrey's life, but nope. Kuradel flipped his sword around and slowly pushed it into Godfrey. His health started to drain away. Kuradel leaned in, making it worse. Godfrey let out a blood-curdling scream. Kuradel. At the same time, Kuradel shrieked with excitement. Kuradel. Their voices were almost identical, one filled with pain, and the other with crazy delight. The battle was intense. Godfrey's health bar kept dropping as Kuradel's sword dug deeper. My friend and I watched in shock, unable to do anything. Then in a split second, Kuradel's sword slammed into the ground, and Godfrey's HP hit 0. It all happened so fast that Godfrey didn't even have time to react before he exploded into tiny pieces. Kuradel slowly pulled out his massive sword and turned to us with a creepy robotic stare. Idia, Media, my friend screamed, trying to run away. But Kuradel was too quick. He jumped towards my friend with a weird bouncy step. I'm not mad at you. Kuradel muttered, but in my story I need to be the only one left standing. Then, he swung his sword again. My friend let out another terrified shriek. Idia. Kuradel just repeated himself. Got that. Our party was in big trouble. We were ambushed by a group of thugs in the middle of nowhere. I heard my friends scream as we got attacked. Then I saw Kurata strike him again and again. My friends fought back, but one by one they fell. I was the only one who managed to escape and make it back to the guild. As Kuratas landed his 4th hit, our friend's health points disappeared. The sound sent shivers down my spine. But to Kurata's like music, he was shaking with excitement. A huge smile on his face. It was like he was in heaven. This wasn't Kurata's first time doing something like this, I realized. Before the attack he didn't have a warning sign over his head, which usually shows up when someone does something bad. But I knew there were ways to hurt people in the game without getting caught. Kuratos must have known some of those tricks. It was too late now, and I was in big trouble. Kuradel's eyes locked onto mine, and I saw a creepy excitement in them. He took his time walking towards me, scraping the tip of his sword against the ground. It made a weird annoying sound. As he loomed over me, he said in a low voice, "So, hey, I've killed 2 innocent guys just to get to you." I shot back, "You seem to enjoy it pretty much." I was trying to distract him with conversation, but my brain was racing to find a way out of this mess. The problem was, I was paralyzed and could only move my mouth and left hand. I was trapped and couldn't even open my menu or send a message for help. I knew it was a long shot, but I tried to sneak my hand into a spot where Kureto couldn't see it. At the same time I kept talking to distract him. "Hey, why did you join the Knights of the Blood Oath?" I asked. "You seem like someone who would fit in better with a group of bad guys." Kureto's voice was all rough and creepy as he replied. "Isn't it obvious? It's because of her." He licked his lips with his pointy tongue, and my heart started racing when I realized he was talking about Asuna. My whole body felt like it was on fire. "You're disgusting," I shouted at him, but Kureto just smirked. "Don't be so serious," he said. "It's just a game, right? Don't worry. I'll take good care of your precious vice commander." He picked up a bottle of poison that was sitting nearby and swirled the liquid around inside it. He winked at me in a goofy way and kept talking. "I have to say, what you said about me being a good fit for a group of thieves was really interesting." He smiled slyly and added, "You're right, aren't you?" Then he chuckled again, this time deep in his throat. Suddenly he took off one of his arm guards and pulled up the sleeve of his white robe. He showed me the underside of his forearm, and my eyes widened in surprise. There was a tattoo on his skin. It was a cartoonish picture of a black coffin with a creepy face on the lid. It had beady eyes and a mouth that seemed to be laughing. A bony arm poked out of the coffin, making it look like something was trying to escape. I gasped when I saw it. "That symbol, is that the mark of Laughing Coffin?" I asked, my voice shaking a little. Kureto's face lit up with a huge grin, as he nodded enthusiastically. He was talking about Laughing Coffin, once the most notorious player-killing guild in the virtual world of Aincrad. This group was led by a super sneaky and ruthless leader who loved coming up with creative ways to take down their targets, and sadly they were really good at it. Their kill counts skyrocketed into the hundreds. Some players tried to make peace with Laughing Coffin, but it didn't end well. One brave player even volunteered to be a messenger, hoping to negotiate a truce. Unfortunately, he ended up getting killed too. It's hard to understand why someone would want to hurt their fellow players, especially when working together could help everyone beat the game. In the end, a group of top players called the Clearers decided they'd had enough. They formed a powerful team like one you'd assemble to take down a tough boss, and launched a surprise attack on Laughing Coffin. The battle was intense, and in the end, the Clearers emerged victorious, wiping out the troublesome guild once and for all. Not long ago, Asuna and I were part of a big raid, but somehow our secret plan got out, and the bad guys were waiting for us. I was so worried about my friends that I freaked out trying to keep them safe. By the end of the fight I had taken down 2 members of the evil group Laughing Coffin. I looked at Kureto with a mix of anger and sadness. "Is this payback?" I asked in a rough voice. "Are you still working with Laughing Coffin?" Kureto just laughed at me. "No way, I'm not that weak," he said. "I only joined them recently, and it was all in my head. That's when they taught me some cool tricks, like this paralysis move." Kureto stood up super smoothly and grabbed his sword tightly. "Let's wrap up our chat before the poison wears off," he said with a sneer. "It's time for the final show." The moment of truth had finally arrived. Every night since our epic battle I'd been dreaming of this showdown. My opponent Kureto was totally psyched. His eyes were wide with excitement and he was literally foaming at the mouth. He stood up on his tiptoes, waving his sword in the air, just as he was about to strike. I made my move. I flicked a small throwing pick that I'd been hiding in my left hand. But here's the thing, I was partially paralyzed, so I could only use my wrist. My aim was off, and instead of hitting Kureto right between the eyes, the pick flew to the side and lodged itself in his arm. Kureto barely even flinched. The damage was super minimal, and his health bar hardly budged. He just scrunched up his face and said, "That hurt." It was pretty clear that I needed to come up with a new plan if I wanted to take him down. Oh, Kureto was being super creepy. He poked his sword into my arm, and then twisted it around like he was screwing in a light bulb. I didn't feel any pain, but it was really weird. My nerves felt numb, but also kind of tingling. As the sword went deeper, my health started to slip away. I was thinking, come on. Hurry up. When is this poison going to wear off? I clenched my teeth, and waited for the moment when I'd finally be free. Usually paralysis lasts about 5 minutes, but it can vary depending on how strong the venom is. Just as I thought things couldn't get any worse, Kureto pulled out his sword and stabbed me in the foot. He was really enjoying this, and I was getting more and more frustrated by the second. I felt that numbness again, and my health points were dropping fast. The guy leaned in close and whispered, "So, how does it feel to know you're about to die? Why don't you say something? Why don't you scream and beg for your life?" My health bar was now yellow, which meant I was in big trouble. I couldn't move because of the paralysis, and I could feel a cold chill spreading through my body. It was like death itself was creeping up on me. I'd seen people die in the game Sword Art Online before. When it happened, they always looked shocked and confused, like they couldn't believe it was really happening to them. They'd think, is this really the end? Deep down, I think we all thought that maybe the game wasn't as real as it seemed. Maybe when our health ran out, and we disappeared into thin air, we'd just wake up in the real world, safe and sound. It was a tiny spark of hope that made us think, this can't be the end, can it? Imagine being trapped in a game with no way out, except maybe by dying. That's the crazy thought that was running through my head. Hey, say something. You're almost a goner. Karadel yanked his sword out of my foot and pressed it against my stomach. My health was plummeting and I could feel the pain getting worse. But it all felt like it was happening to someone else. My mind was a mess, like it was wrapped in a thick fog. I couldn't think straight. Then, out of nowhere, a terrifying thought hit me. Asuna, what would happen to her if I disappeared? The fear gripped my heart and wouldn't let go. I couldn't bear the thought of Asuna falling into Karadel's evil hands and suffering like I was. The idea sent a sharp pain through me, and suddenly I was wide awake. "Gaw!" I shouted, my eyes snapping open. With my left hand, I grabbed the sword that Karadel was trying to stab into my stomach. I summoned every last bit of strength I had, and slowly pulled the sword out. I was running on fumes. I had less than 10% of my health left. Karadel's eyes widened in surprise. "Huh? What's going on?" he muttered. "Afraid to die now?" he sneered. I gritted my teeth and replied, "That's right, I won't die yet." Karadel let out a crazy laugh like a bird shrieking in the night. "Haha, that's more like it." He threw all his weight into the sword, trying to push it back into me. But I refused to give up. With one hand I pushed back against him, determined not to let him win. My heart was racing as the system compared my strength to Karadel's. It was like a super complex math problem, with our powers going head to head. The result was terrifying. The sword inched its way down, getting closer and closer to me. I felt a wave of fear wash over me. Was this really the end? Would I die here and leave Asuna behind? In this crazy world, I tried to fight back against the sword and the fear that was gripping my heart. But Karadel just laughed maniacally. "Now die. He screamed. The sword point kept coming, inch by inch, a gray metal blade that seemed to be moving in slow motion. It brushed against me, then sank in a little deeper. Just as all hope seemed lost, a blast of wind shot through the air. It was a weird color, white and red swirled together. I was shocked. What's going on? I wondered. I couldn't believe my eyes. The bad guy's sword went flying out of his hands, and he soared through the air with a terrified scream. Then a new figure appeared out of nowhere. It was Asuna. She looked like an angel, her voice shaking as she whispered, "I made it. I really made it." Asuna stumbled towards me, her lips trembling and her eyes wide with worry. "You're alive, Kirito, right?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I tried to answer, but my voice came out super weak and faint. "Yeah, I'm alive," I stammered. Asuna's face lit up with relief, and she nodded eagerly. She pulled out a shiny pink crystal from her pocket, and placed it on my chest. "Heal," she said, and the crystal started to glow. Suddenly, my health points or HP skyrocketed back to full strength. I felt a surge of energy flow through me, but just as things were looking up, Asuna said, "Wait a minute. Almost done," she said with a smile after checking that I was all better. Then she pulled out her super cool rapier, and started walking towards Karado. He was just getting up from the ground and his eyes went wide when he saw Asuna coming for him. "Oh, Lady Asuna, what are you doing here?" he stuttered. I mean, this was just a test that didn't go as planned. But before he could come up with a good excuse, Asuna's rapier flashed in the light. The tip of it slashed across Karado's mouth, making him cry out in pain. Karado stumbled backward, clutching his mouth with one hand. He was already in big trouble for being a bad player, so Asuna didn't have to worry about getting in trouble for fighting him. "Bah!" he shouted, clearly not happy about what just happened. The guy didn't stay down for long. He jumped up again, and his face twisted with hatred. "That's enough from you," he sneered. But before he could say another word, Asuna charged at him, her sword flashing in the light. The guy tried to defend himself with his big two-handed sword. But it was too slow. Asuna's sword moved so fast, it looked like a streak of light, striking again and again. I watched in amazement as she fought. Even though the guy was way stronger than her, Asuna's sword sliced through him, like he was nothing. I couldn't even follow her movements. It was like my eyes were glued to a beautiful dance. Asuna looked like an angel, her sword flying through the air with incredible speed and precision. It was an amazing sight. Imagine watching Asuna take down her enemy with style. Her brown hair bounced with each move as she fought with a fierce determination that was actually kind of awesome. Karadel, on the other hand, was totally freaking out. "Aga, gaga," he yelled, swinging his sword wildly but missing Asuna every time. His health was dropping fast, and when it got really low, he finally dropped his sword and surrendered. Okay, I'm sorry, it was all my fault," he cried, cowering on the ground. "I'll quit the guild, and never come back. I swear, just please don't." Asuna didn't say a word, she just listened to Karadel's pathetic pleas. Then, she slowly raised her sword, spinning it in her hand, until the point was facing down. Her arm tensed up, getting ready to strike Karadel right in the back as he lay there on the ground. The killer let out a super loud high-pitched shriek. "Eek? Eek! I don't want to die." It was like time froze, the blade just stopped in midair. Asuna's body started shaking all over. From where I stood I could feel her inner struggle. She was torn between hesitation, anger and fear. This was a big deal. In Sword Art Online, if you killed another player, they died in real life too. It wasn't just a game, it was actual murder. Asuna had never killed anyone before, and now she was facing a huge decision. A part of me wanted to yell, "Stop! Don't do it!" But another part of me was screaming the opposite. "Don't hold back. Keep going." I was totally conflicted. The truth is, in this game, PK or player killing wasn't just a fancy term. It meant taking someone's life for real. And that's what made this moment so intense. Kuradil was begging for mercy, but I knew he couldn't be trusted. And then my worst fears came true. With a loud "Hajala," Kuradil jumped up, his sword flashing in the light as he screamed. Asuna's rapier flew out of her hand with a loud clang. "What the Sioux?" she yelped, losing her balance. Kuradil was furious, and his eyes looked crazy. He swung his sword down at Asuna, shouting, "Not very smart, Vice Commander." The sword glowed with a deep red light as it came crashing down. I knew I had to act fast. With a mighty roar, "Raja!" I leaped into action. I sprinted across the room in an instant, pushing Asuna out of harm's way just in time. But I wasn't so lucky. Kuradil's sword sliced through my left arm and it flew off at the elbow with a sickening chunk sound. The pain was intense, but I was relieved that Asuna was safe. How could Kuradil be so cruel? I glanced down and saw a warning sign below my health bar. My limb was damaged. It looked like blood was gushing out of the cut, but I didn't let that stop me. I straightened my fingers and plunged my right hand into a weak spot in Karadel's heavy armor. My arm glowed yellow as it sank into his stomach with a squelching sound. I had used Embracer, a powerful martial arts move that always packs a punch. The attack was too much for Kuradel. His whole body started shaking violently and then he collapsed, defeated. His huge sword clattered to the ground, and I heard him whispering in my ear, "Why? You murderer." He even managed to laugh. But it was his last laugh. Suddenly Karadel's body turned into 1,000 glass shards and exploded into tiny pieces, sending me tumbling to the ground. For a few moments, everything was quiet except for the wind blowing across the field. I felt dazed and couldn't think straight. But then I heard the sound of footsteps crunching on gravel. Getting closer and closer. Someone or something was coming my way. I looked up and saw Asuna stumbling towards me. She looked really weak, and her face was blank. As she got closer, she stared down at the ground and then suddenly dropped to her knees. It was like someone had pulled the strings out from under her. She reached out a shaky hand towards me, but then quickly pulled it back before we touched. Asuna's voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. This is all my fault," she said, sounding really sad. Her big eyes filled up with tears that sparkled like diamonds, and then they started to fall. I tried to speak, but my throat was super dry. All I could manage to say was Asuna. She kept apologizing, her voice cracking. I'm sorry, I don't deserve to even see you anymore. Just then, I finally felt like I was in control of my body again. I pushed myself up from the ground, desperate to do something. I was still feeling the pain from what had happened earlier, but at least I could move my right arm and my injured left arm. I reached out to Asuna with both arms, then I leaned in and kissed her. She was surprised and tried to push me away, but I held on tight. I knew this could get me into trouble. The game had a rule against bothering other players without their permission. If Asuna wanted to, she could report me and I'd be sent straight to a virtual jail in a place called Black Iron Palace. But I didn't back off. Instead, I kept holding her and gently rubbed my face against her cheek. I buried my face in Asuna's neck and whispered, "You own my heart, Asuna. I'm all yours. We'll be together forever." My left arm was still useless. It would take 3 minutes to grow back, but I wrapped it around her anyway. Asuna took a shaky breath and whispered back, "I promise to protect you too. I'll always be here for you. Just don't leave me." She didn't need to say another word. I held her tight and listened to her breathe. As I hugged her, the warmth of her body started to melt the ice in my heart. It was amazing what Asuna had just done. While she was waiting for me in Granzam, she had been tracking my location on her map. When she saw that Godfrey's marker disappeared, she took off running. And get this, she covered 3 miles in just 5 minutes. That's a distance. It took us an hour to walk. Asuna had run so fast to reach me, and that thought made me feel happy and grateful. Something weird just happened. Asuna's speed was way faster than it should be, even with her special power-up. When I mentioned it, she just smiled and said it was an act of love. We headed back to our guild's main base, and told Heathcliff what went down. Asuna asked for some time off, because she didn't trust the guild right now. Heathcliff was quiet for a moment, then agreed. But as we were leaving, he gave us that weird smile again and said, "You'll be back in battle before you know it." As we walked out of the tower, the sun began to set. Asuna and I held hands, but neither of us said a word. The orange light of the sun shone down on us as we strolled through the dark shadows of Granzam's many towers. I couldn't help but wonder what made Kuradel so full of hate. It's not like he was the only bad guy in the game though. There were hundreds of players who did terrible things in SAO: thieves, bandits and even murderers like Kuradel and his friends in Laughing Coffin. Here's the rewritten text. At first, I thought players who hurt others on purpose were just a normal part of the game. Like monsters you had to fight. But the more I thought about it, the weirder it seemed. If someone was trying to harm other players, they were basically working against our team goal of beating the game. It was like they didn't want to escape. But then I thought about Kuradel, and he didn't seem to fit into that category. He wasn't trying to trap us in the game, or stop us from winning. He was different. He had stopped thinking about what mattered, and just did whatever he wanted, which usually meant doing bad things. So what did that make me? Was I like him, or was I something else entirely? Here's the rewritten text. To be honest, beating the game wasn't my main goal. I was just going through the motions, exploring dungeons and leveling up, because it's what I always did. If the only reason I fought was to prove I'm better than others, then did I really want the game to end? Suddenly I felt the metal plate beneath me start to tip and sink. I froze, grabbing Asuna's hand tighter like I was trying not to let go. I glanced over at her and saw she was looking at me weirdly. Her head tilted to one side like she was wondering what was wrong.